Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. My name's Alison Stewart and I'm your host of this session of Cut the Crop. And today I'm talking to FAR Senior Research Officer Ben Harvey. Hi, Ben.
Good morning.
Yeah. And Ben's been involved in a 5-year programme of work looking at herbicide-resistant weeds. And so we're just going to have a little bit of a chat around what has come out of that 5 years worth of work. And it involved a reasonably major survey looking for the presence of herbicide-resistant weeds. So just talk us about, like how big was the survey, how extensive was it, and what were you looking for?
So we had 5 years, so we chose 5 of the biggest arable regions of New Zealand. And in each of those regions, we aimed to go to around 20% of the arable farms in that region. And we selected those randomly so that we could get an idea of how prevalent the issue is on arable farms in those 5 regions. And we were successful in that. We sometimes got a little bit more than 20% if we had time. And we got good engagement from a lot of growers, and we managed to get some really good results in five of the different regions.
Well, I wouldn't say good results.
That's a good point, Alison. There are some encouraging signs, is that because we know it is good that we know. Yeah. And we know it's not beyond the point of no return. We're not in as bad a situation as they are in Australia at the moment, or in some parts of the UK, for instance, with blackgrass. So we're at a point where we think we've got some good data that will allow us to make a plan for people and to sort of give them some tools.
So what did the survey show? Different groups, obviously different levels of resistance. Yeah,
so there is quite a range of amounts of resistance between the regions, although it is everywhere. Everywhere we looked, we found some. Yeah. The place where it wasn't quite so prevalent, it was difficult to find, was in the lower North Island, Manawatu, Wairarapa. Hawke's Bay is a little bit more because of the maize. So in maize, it's quite prevalent. That we know that from AgResearch did a separate survey just in maize in the north of the North Island, and they found quite high levels of resistance there. So when we went to the lower North Island, we found only about 11% of the farms that we went to had some form of resistance, and there wasn't very much of that. However, when we went to places like it's prevalent in Canterbury, especially in South Canterbury. There's also quite a bit in Southland and South Otago. So, the numbers are getting quite worrying, and there's groups that are formed, especially in South Canterbury, to try to make a bit more of a plan about how to manage this issue.
So the level that we're finding at the moment, that's presumably just being driven by the amount of historical use.
Yes, we think so. One of the reasons why we think it is worst in South Canterbury and to a lesser extent in Mid Canterbury and here in North Canterbury is that the more arable you do, the bigger the risk is. If you've got pasture in the system in your crop rotation, then that breaks up the kind of weeds that you get in arable crops if you're just doing arable all the time. Another big risk is growing grass for seed. We don't necessarily have the data to prove that, but it's a hypothesis that we have that we think is probably pretty close to being accurate. If you're growing grass for seed, then you're going to get grass seed on the ground after the crop, and in the following crop, that seed is going to become a problem. So that needs to be something that growers need to know how to manage, whether they plough it under or put in a break crop or something like that. So a broadleaf crop would be a good one to follow a grass seed, especially if you're in a regenerative no-till situation. And in South Canterbury in particular, they have quite limited options for their rotations, and also quite a few of them are they're not very keen to use things like spring sown crops, which if you can vary between autumn and spring sown crops in a paddock, then that will break up weed life cycles as well. Whereas if you're growing the same sort of thing year after year after year, then you're going to be experiencing the same weeds. And if you're using the same crops, you're going to be using the same herbicides. And it's overuse of herbicides that is the biggest risk factor for a herbicide-resistant weed population to develop.
So what weeds and what levels of resistance on?
Yes, so South Canterbury is the big one. I've already said that the North Island was less, but South Canterbury, 71% of the farms that we visited had it. Now, that was in the second year of the survey, so perhaps awareness wasn't quite at the level that it is now. We know that in the last year of the survey, we went to mid-Canterbury, and a lot of the growers there already knew that there was an issue, and sometimes we couldn't even find things because they'd already been out there dealing with it.
Yeah.
In terms of what weeds, I've already said grasses. So it was mostly grasses, although there are some broadleaf weeds that are a problem, particularly in certain regions. Southland had a couple. That was chickweed and rayless chamomile, which is called pineapple weed elsewhere in the country. Those were the two there. We also know that fat hen and maize can be an issue in the North Island. Now, all of these, the ones that we found in our arable surveys, all of the weeds that we found that were resistant to group 1 and 2 mode of action herbicides. Mode of action isn't something that all growers will be familiar with, but we'd like them to get more familiar with it. And we do have resources on our website to help you with that. We've got a printable poster which has a lot of information on it, and there's other things out there too. But those group 1s are the FOPs, DIMs, and DENs, so pinoxidin, which is Twinax, and haloxyfop, all of those ones that end with fop, like clodinafop, and so they're products which are specific for grasses, and we did find levels of resistance in grasses to those products. The group 2s were perhaps a bit more of a problem. A lot of ryegrass resistance to group 2 chemistry, and those are used in a lot of situations, but particularly in cereals. So things like Othello and Glean, which is, I forget this right, iodosulfuron. There's also chlorsulfuron. So all those sulfonylurea chemistries, those are the ones that, and worldwide, they're also the biggest problem in terms of herbicide-resistant weeds. Those are the ones that seem to develop resistance most quickly and develop populations most quickly.
So did we find any glyphosate resistance? We
didn't in our survey. So the random survey didn't pick it up. We do know that it exists. We've had it reported to us from sort of industry samples, but the random survey didn't pick it up, and we certainly looked for it and we tested for it. We know that glyphosate resistance is a problem in viticulture. So grapevines, it's standard practice to spray glyphosate under the vines all the time, just to keep weeds down. And we know that there's a problem with glyphosate resistant, often ryegrass again. And we've seen that is a problem.
Was this a surprise, that the results of the survey? Like, did people think, oh gosh, that's more than we thought, or that's less than we thought?
Definitely a surprise in terms of it is more than we thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially in those bad areas. We had really no idea that it was quite as bad as that. And we've done a lot more work to see perhaps why. I've spoken already about the types of systems that can lead to these issues. But we've also discovered that, particularly in ryegrass, which is the only one we really looked at, ryegrass seed populations, when you buy a bag of seed, when we tested, we found that every cultivar that we tested had some level of background herbicide resistance just naturally in the seed line. So it exists, and it's a matter of managing your system so that those genes, those alleles, don't become dominant in the population. So that's it. You're keeping your rotation robust and using different forms of herbicides and having different types of crops that allow you to use them. And of course, using integrated weed management, using those cultural controls, different sowing times, false and stale seed beds. There's a lot of ways you can reduce your reliance on herbicides so that these problems don't get out of control. So
you talked about the main resistance was to group 1 and group 2. What other groups are out there, that the growers have got options?
So,
and how do we make sure that we protect them?
Yes, that's a very good point, because we know that in Australia they've been relying on the pre-emerge herbicides in order to manage the herbicide resistance problem that they have, and they are now starting to lose their efficacy. So we are still recommending that those, particularly things like Group 15s, which are Secura and Avidex and Firebird, those products are very good for just helping you to control those herbicide-resistant populations. And we also would like to point out that there's a couple of things, because we do know that that resistance has been reported to us by some chemical companies is starting to creep in low levels in some parts of New Zealand. So those products, before we thought no resistance, but now we are starting to see small amounts. So the advice at the moment is to use full label rates so that you don't have any escapes or fewer escapes, and to make sure that you use that not in isolation. So you can still go in with your Group 2s afterwards when the weeds come up, but you've used it as part of a herbicide program which has multiple modes of action. And I think those were the sort of the main two that we've had from the chemical companies, is to do that. Just make sure you're just practicing good practices, like make sure your spraying equipment is good and it's calibrated, and all the nozzles are clear, and putting it on correctly. Particularly for some of those pre-emergers, they need some moisture around to be activated. So make sure that happens if you can. If you've got irrigation, use that. So whatever you can do to make sure that the herbicides that you are using are working properly, then you need to be sure that you're doing that.
Yeah. So what's happening with respect to doing any more surveying for herbicide resistance? I mean, that was a 5-year program that was funded by, I think it was MB, and that was finished. So because this is obviously a big priority for FAR, what is FAR going to continue to be doing in this space?
So we do have some fires in the iron, as it were, with trying to get some more funding to do some more of this. And AgResearch are also keen to come on board, and they have another application into MB. Mm-hmm. Whether or not surveys will be a part of that, we're not sure yet. We would like to get out there and do some more. However, the research does show that the more often you go back, the less return you actually get in terms of how much effectiveness you're having in terms of changing behaviour or what you can actually do with the information. It's certainly nice to know, is it getting worse? Are we being effective in the messages that we're getting out there? We would like to know that. But whether or not that will actually happen or when, I don't know yet. Yeah.
I mean, the reality is, though, that you don't have to be a brain surgeon to look at what's happened overseas with the build-up of herbicide resistance and, the loss of herbicides to know that that's the path that we are likely to be on. And so I don't think that if we did another survey in 5 years that the situation would have got better. I mean, with this type of thing, I mean, I haven't done a lot of work in herbicide resistance. I've done a lot in fungicide resistance, and you never go back to how good it was. All you can do is hold off, unless you've got lots of new fungicides coming onto the market with new modes of action, which the reality is that we don't. So the most important thing that we can do for our growers is to get awareness out and to educate them on how do you manage this as best you can to slow it down as much as you can.
That's absolutely right, and that is what we're doing. So we've been getting the message out. We've been just at autumn roundups in the last week or so, getting that message out and telling people what they can do. And of course, our door is always open. You can always contact us for any problems. And we have a close working relationship with many people in the chemical industry as well. And, they're very aware and they don't want to lose the efficacy of the products that they're selling. So they're working with us quite closely in some instances to really make sure that we can keep safeguarding these chemistries and continue to use them into the future.
Yeah. And I guess we also do have to, by default, look at those other cultural, physical, alternative weed management, because any other option that a grower can bring in that helps reduce or manage the herbicide resistance is part of that integrated weed management practice.
Yeah, we think that's absolutely vital, and certainly a big part of the new project that we're trying to get funding for is looking at some of those integrated weed management techniques. And we've already we've had trials in the last couple of years looking at some of those other ways of doing things like tine weeding, like increasing the plant density to try to reduce the amount of weeds through crop competition. And we're sort of expanding what we're doing in that space as well, because there's only so far you can go with herbicides. We've done a lot of herbicide trials, and some people would like us to do more, and we will do more, but we need to expand out into other things as well, because as you say, the new chemistries aren't coming. There are some in Australia, but the chemical companies seem to be a little reluctant at this point to bring them into New Zealand.
Well, the market size is
the cost
small.
of actually registering them. They're actually still, unless you have herbicide resistance, they're not as effective, these new chemistries, as the old ones. So we it is a big mountain to climb, and there's a lot riding on it. And we really need to think hard about how we're going to tackle this problem and not just go down one path. We need to have multiple ways of attacking.
And this is not something that's specific to arable. I mean, sort of like the vegetable industries and, all the plant sectors are challenged with this.
Yes, and the MB project actually was across multiple sectors. We were just one part of it.
Yeah.
We handled the arable side, and we know that the AgResearch and some of the other organisations, the viticulture one was part of this program. So they were all on board and looking at their own industries.
Yeah. Okay, so any final words that you'd like to get out there?
Testing. If you think you've got a problem and you want to get it tested, do contact us. We don't have as much access as we did when the program was running, but we think we can still do it, and some of the chemical companies are running a service. But if you think you have a problem, it's probably best to take action, and assuming that you do have one.
Yeah.
So, but do contact us. We've got we can give advice and maybe put you in contact with other people who can if we can't.
Yeah, and resources that people can access.
We do have quite a bit on our website. Sometimes it can be difficult to find, so contact us if you are having trouble with that. There are other things out there too, and also talk to your agrochemical rep. They're well aware that this is an issue, and they'll have some things for you to access as well.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Ben. And thank you, listeners. Have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.